how burnout controls you and tries to destroy your dreams, and how to get out. There's a moment in every driven person's life when passion begins to rot from the inside. You don't notice it at first, because it looks like progress. You're working harder, pushing further, chasing excellence with every drop of energy you have left. But then, something shifts. What once fueled you now drains you. The fire that used to light your way starts burning you alive. And you tell yourself it's just a phase, just fatigue, just one more push until things get better. But that's the lie burnout whispers before it takes everything. Burnout isn't just exhaustion. It's psychological erosion. It's when your nervous system starts collapsing under the weight of an identity built entirely on performance. Your brain, once sharp and hungry, begins to feel foggy. Your emotions flatten. You lose your ability to care about what once mattered. And yet, you keep going, because stopping feels like failure. That's how burnout traps you. It convinces you that rest is weakness, that slowing down means giving up, that if you don't keep running, everything you've built will fall apart. But what if the thing destroying you isn't your dream? It's the way you're chasing it. Neuroscience tells us that sustained stress hijacks the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that gives you focus, creativity, and emotional regulation. When cortisol stays high and dopamine runs low, your brain rewires itself for survival, not purpose. You stop thinking long-term. You start living hour by hour, task by task, deadline by deadline, a prisoner of your own ambition. The irony is cruel. The same brain chemistry that once powered your growth now chains you to exhaustion. Andrew Huberman's research reveals that dopamine, the molecule of motivation, becomes toxic when you no longer balance effort with recovery. The reward system collapses. You start mistaking effort itself for meaning. You chase stress like it's oxygen. Your nervous system learns to associate exhaustion with accomplishment, and in doing so, it builds an invisible addiction to chaos, to pressure, to urgency. That's why burnout isn't laziness. It's the body's rebellion against a mind that won't stop running. But beneath the neuroscience lies something deeper, the philosophical wound. René Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." Today, we've turned that into, "I produce, therefore I matter." We've replaced being with doing, and now we wonder why we feel hollow. The truth is, burnout isn't just physical depletion, it's spiritual disconnection. You lose not only your energy, but your sense of self. You forget how to exist without earning it. And yet there's hope, because burnout is not a breakdown, it's a message. It's your body and mind telling you that the way you're living is no longer sustainable. It's not trying to destroy you, it's trying to wake you up. The cure is not to quit your dreams, but to rebuild the system that supports them, one rooted in balance, awareness, and alignment with who you truly are. The same mind that burned you out can rebuild you if you learn how to listen to it. This is the point where science, psychology, and philosophy meet, where awareness becomes the antidote. You're about to see that burnout isn't the end of your purpose. It's the invitation to rediscover it. The hidden face of burnout. When passion becomes poison. Burnout doesn't begin with failure. It begins with love. Love for what you do. Love for the dream you're chasing. Love for the feeling of purpose. But over time, that same love starts turning into something darker. The more you push, the more your brain links your worth to performance. The line between dedication and dependency blurs, and what once felt like passion quietly becomes poison. You're not chasing meaning anymore. You're chasing the feeling of being enough. At first, the signs are invisible. You feel tired but call it ambition. You feel anxious but call it motivation. You feel detached but call it focus. That's how burnout hides. It disguises suffering as success. Each late night, each sacrifice, each moment of self-neglect feels justified because you tell yourself it's part of the process. The dopamine rush of progress blinds you to the fact that your brain is being rewired. What used to inspire you now consumes you. You're not building a life. You're managing a fire that never goes out. Andrew Huberman's studies on motivation show that dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for drive, is not limitless. It operates in cycles. Every burst of effort depletes it, and without proper recovery, the brain's reward system begins to collapse. You start needing more stimulation to feel the same motivation. Longer hours, bigger goals, higher stakes. Your nervous system becomes trapped in constant activation, pumping cortisol to sustain the illusion of energy. But cortisol, when prolonged, begins to attack the very neural pathways responsible for focus and emotional regulation. What you call grind is, at the biological level, self-destruction. Psychology calls this the identity trap. You become so merged with your output that stopping feels like dying. Jordan B. Peterson describes it as chaos masquerading as order. A person so desperate to stay in control that they can't see they've lost it. You tell yourself you're in charge, but your habits are the ones driving. You've become addicted to motion because motion makes you forget how exhausted you really are. It's not productivity anymore. It's avoidance. An escape from silence, from stillness, from the confrontation with your own limits. This is where burnout starts turning the mind against itself. You begin resenting what you once loved. The same dream that used to give you energy now drains it. And instead of questioning the system, you question yourself. You start believing you've lost discipline, talent, or drive, when in truth, you've lost balance. The dream didn't betray you, the way you pursued it did. The brain you once trained for focus is now wired for survival. Every task feels heavier because your body is fighting your own mind's obsession with progress. But awareness is the beginning of repair. When you start recognizing that what feels like weakness is actually a biological warning, everything changes. Burnout is not your enemy. It's your nervous system trying to protect you from collapse. It's your subconscious pleading for alignment, not achievement. The same energy that created the poison can also create the cure, but only if you learn to stop seeing rest as surrender. Rest is not the opposite of progress, it's the foundation of it. You are not lazy for feeling tired. You are not broken for needing pause. You are simply human, a being designed for rhythm, not endless acceleration. Passion is a gift, but only when it serves you, not when it consumes you. When you learn to separate who you are from what you do, passion becomes pure again. It stops being poison and returns to being purpose. The brain under siege, how stress hijacks your focus. Your brain is a masterpiece of balance, designed to adapt, recover, and create. But under constant pressure, that masterpiece begins to malfunction. Burnout isn't just exhaustion, it's the biological breakdown of clarity. The more you push through fatigue, the more your brain shifts from a creative engine into a survival machine. You stop thinking. You start reacting. You're no longer building. You're defending. The brain that once sought growth begins fighting for escape. Andrew Huberman's neuroscience research reveals what happens beneath the surface. When you live under chronic stress, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, becomes hypersensitive. It floods your system with cortisol, preparing you for danger that doesn't exist. This chemical surge narrows your focus, restricts creativity, and suppresses the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making, discipline, and vision. The result? You become more alert, but less intelligent. You start working harder while thinking less clearly. Burnout doesn't just tire you, it rewires you to confuse urgency with importance. This explains why the deeper you fall into burnout, the more you double down on control.
You make lists, schedules, and plans, desperate attempts to impose order on a brain drowning in chaos. Yet every plan becomes another demand. Your mind can't differentiate between a to-do list and a threat. The same stress hormones that would save your life in an emergency now activate every time you check your phone, open an email, or see an unfinished task. You're trapped in a loop where effort becomes both the cause and the consequence of fatigue.
From a psychological perspective, This is called cognitive depletion, the gradual erosion of mental energy. Daniel Goleman describes it as the collapse of emotional intelligence. You stop noticing how you feel. Empathy fades. Impulse rises. Small frustrations trigger outsized reactions because your nervous system is in a constant state of defense. You lose your ability to regulate emotions, and with it, your sense of perspective. Everything feels urgent, personal, and heavy. You think you're solving problems, but you're only extinguishing fires your mind keeps relighting. Joe Dispenza's work on neuroplasticity provides the other half of the picture. The more you repeat a thought, the stronger the neural pathway becomes. Chronic stress reinforces the circuits of anxiety. You literally teach your brain to expect chaos. The longer this continues, the harder it becomes to access calm. That's why rest stops feeling restorative. Your brain doesn't trust peace anymore. Silence feels unsafe because the body has learned that stillness means danger is near. You become addicted to tension, mistaking it for productivity. Philosophically, this is the exact inversion of clarity. Descartes sought truth through reason, believing that the mind could bring order to chaos. But burnout reverses that process. Chaos takes over the mind and calls itself order. You're thinking less about meaning and more about management. You no longer ask why, only what's next. And in that shift, your humanity begins to fade behind the mechanical rhythm of survival. The good news is that the brain can unlearn this pattern. Neuroplasticity works both ways. The same repetition that created burnout can undo it, if you consciously choose new habits of focus and recovery. When you slow your breathing, step away from constant stimulation, and reconnect with single-task awareness, you begin reactivating the prefrontal cortex. Cortisol levels drop, dopamine stabilizes. The fog starts to lift. What felt impossible begins to feel manageable again. Your brain isn't broken, it's overwhelmed. It's not trying to destroy you, it's trying to protect you from a life lived at a speed it was never designed to sustain. Once you understand that, you stop blaming yourself for being tired and start listening to what that fatigue is telling you. Because exhaustion is not a failure of willpower. It's the voice of a brain begging you to come back home to clarity. The illusion of progress. When doing more means becoming less. There's a dangerous belief that productivity equals progress, that the more you do, the more you become. But burnout reveals the opposite truth. Beyond a certain point, doing more makes you less creative, less connected, less alive. You start measuring your worth in output, not insight, in speed, not depth. And without realizing it, you trade the art of living for the mechanics of surviving. You call it discipline, but it's dependency, a psychological addiction to movement that keeps you from stillness, reflection, and meaning. The brain rewards action. Every time you complete a task, dopamine gives you a brief hit of satisfaction, a small spark that tells you you're progressing. But when you overuse that system, it begins to malfunction. Andrew Huberman's research shows that when dopamine spikes too often, the baseline level drops. What used to feel fulfilling now feels empty. You need more tasks, more pressure, more chaos just to feel the same rush of purpose. You become addicted not to progress itself, but to the feeling of chasing it. It's not growth anymore. It's compulsion. Psychologically, this illusion creates a mental treadmill. You move faster and faster without actually going anywhere. Daniel Goleman would call this attention fragmentation, the loss of sustained focus due to overstimulation. You're so busy doing everything that you no longer see anything clearly. Your brain, deprived of rest, loses its ability to prioritize meaning over motion. You confuse urgency with value. You mistake exhaustion for dedication. You start chasing completion, not creation. This is where burnout becomes existential. You no longer live from intention but from inertia. You wake up and move because stopping feels unbearable. The silence of inaction threatens to expose the truth, that your sense of identity has become dependent on performance. Jordan Peterson often says that meaning is found in responsibility, but burnout distorts that principle. You take on responsibility not out of meaning, but out of fear. Fear of slowing down, of becoming irrelevant, of facing yourself without the noise of constant doing. René Descartes might describe this as the collapse of reason under the illusion of order. In your attempt to control chaos through relentless effort, you've lost the ability to question why you're doing any of it. The mind, obsessed with producing, stops reflecting. It stops asking what kind of person you are becoming through all this activity. And that's the ultimate irony of burnout. You lose the very self that was supposed to be building the dream. Neuroscience proves that mental clarity requires contrast, the alternation between effort and rest. Without recovery, the brain can't consolidate memory, rewire neural pathways, or generate insight. In burnout, this natural rhythm is destroyed. You push through fatigue with caffeine, suppress emotion with distraction, and ignore your body's signals like an enemy to be defeated. But your biology doesn't negotiate. It shuts down what you refuse to regulate. The more you push against rest, the less effective every hour of work becomes. You're not increasing output, you're multiplying inefficiency. To escape the illusion of progress, you must first confront its emotional root, the fear of stillness. Stillness threatens the identity you've built on being in motion. But that stillness is where real progress begins. Not the progress of quantity, but of quality. When you stop long enough to see clearly, your priorities reorder themselves. You begin to act with precision, not panic. You start working from purpose instead of pressure. The illusion of progress will tell you that slowing down is failure. But truth tells you that slowing down is mastery. Real growth isn't measured by how much you do, but by how deeply you understand what you're doing and why. Burnout ends where awareness begins, and awareness begins the moment you stop mistaking movement for meaning. The dopamine trap. Why you can't stop even when you're drained. You tell yourself you'll rest after this project, after this deadline, after this one last push, but after never comes. You stay in motion, even when you're empty. That's not because you lack discipline, it's because your brain has been hijacked. Burnout isn't a failure of willpower, it's a neurochemical addiction. You're trapped in a loop where exhaustion itself triggers the next surge of effort. The system meant to drive you toward purpose now drives you toward depletion. You can't stop because your biology doesn't know how. Andrew Huberman's work on motivation explains why. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter of drive, pursuit, and anticipation, isn't released when you achieve something. It's released when you chase it. The brain rewards effort, not completion. But when you never allow recovery, dopamine receptors become desensitized. What once felt exciting now feels dull. You work harder to feel less. The reward never lands because the system is overloaded. You start craving stress itself, not the success that follows it. You mistake stimulation for purpose. Psychologically, this becomes the perfect trap. Burnout convinces you that slowing down means losing your edge, that stopping means you'll fall behind. Yet what's really happening is that your brain's reward circuitry is collapsing under chronic overstimulation. Like an addict, you chase the next task, the next rush of importance, the next shot of validation. Your nervous system, flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, mistakes panic for productivity. You think you're running toward success, but you're only running from stillness. Daniel Goleman would describe this as the erosion of emotional intelligence. When dopamine and cortisol dominate your brain chemistry, the prefrontal cortex, your center of empathy, reason, and awareness, dims. You become reactive instead of reflective. You lose curiosity, patience, and joy. Your brain's priorities shift from connection to completion. Relationships suffer. Creativity dies. You stop living with life and start living against it, in a perpetual state of internal resistance. Joe Dispenza's findings on neuroplasticity show that this chemical imbalance reshapes your brain. The longer you stay addicted to stress, the more those neural pathways strengthen. You literally hardwire burnout as your default operating system. Calm starts to feel unnatural. Rest feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels wrong. That's why, even when you take time off, your mind keeps racing, because your brain has learned that tension equals safety. You're not lazy when you can't relax. You're neurologically conditioned to resist peace. The ancient philosophers would have recognized this cycle. Marcus Aurelius warned against confusing activity with virtue. He wrote that busyness often hides from meaning. Descartes might have seen burnout as the collapse of rational control under emotional inertia, the moment when reason serves impulse instead of guiding it. The Stoics taught that mastery begins where reaction ends. Burnout reverses that law. It enslaves reason to reaction. The body drives, the mind follows. Breaking the dopamine trap means retraining the system that built it. The first step is paradoxical. Stop seeking the rush. Learn to find satisfaction in the process, not the spike. Huberman notes that true balance comes when you attach dopamine to the act of consistent effort, not to external reward. When you detach meaning from outcome, the brain stops chasing and starts stabilizing. That's how you rebuild your baseline, by rewarding presence, not pressure. The cure for burnout isn't quitting. It's recalibration. You don't need to destroy your ambition. You need to teach your brain that peace is not a threat. When you begin associating calm with strength instead of weakness, the addiction breaks. You rediscover what real drive feels like: focused, steady, and sustainable. The fire burns again, but this time it warms you instead of consuming you. The emotional blackout. When you stop feeling alive. There comes a point in burnout where you stop feeling anything at all. You're not sad, not happy, not angry, just numb. It's like your emotions have been turned off to conserve the last bits of energy your mind has left. You smile when expected, speak when necessary, perform when demanded, but inside there's only static. This is the emotional blackout, the final stage of the body's defense mechanism, where your nervous system shuts down to protect you from yourself. You're not lazy, you're not ungrateful, you're neurologically exhausted. Andrew Huberman's research on the autonomic nervous system explains this collapse. When stress becomes constant, your body switches from fight or flight to a state called freeze. The sympathetic system, once hyperactivated, gives up, and the parasympathetic system tries to restore balance by shutting everything down. You feel detached because your brain is trying to survive. Cortisol levels remain high, dopamine levels crash, and serotonin, the molecule of contentment, disappears. The result is emotional anesthesia. You can't feel joy, connection, or motivation because your system is conserving energy. You're running on emergency power. Daniel Goleman would describe this as the collapse of emotional intelligence, the moment when empathy and self-awareness go dark. You start moving through your days like an observer of your own life. Things that used to inspire you now barely register. You're functioning but not living. And because your outer life still looks productive, no one notices you're fading. That invisibility deepens the wound, the quiet conviction that no one could possibly understand what it feels like to be both overwhelmed and empty at the same time. Joe Dispenza connects this numbness to neuroplastic conditioning. The brain, trained to expect chronic stress, begins to filter out stimuli that aren't urgent. Beauty, humor, intimacy, they all fall outside the range of survival. You stop seeing color in life because your brain has reduced reality to grayscale efficiency. The body mirrors this state: shallow breathing, tense muscles, low energy. It's not just mental burnout, it's physiological shutdown. You've been living in survival mode for so long that your body has forgotten how to feel safe. Philosophically, this moment mirrors what Marcus Aurelius called the death of the inner citadel, when a person loses touch with the flame of purpose within. Descartes would call it the triumph of mechanism over spirit, when the human becomes machine. You perform the motions of existence without the awareness that gives them meaning. You are efficient but hollow, logical but lost. The tragedy of burnout isn't that it exhausts you. It's that it convinces you to live without feeling, to equate numbness with strength. But here lies a turning point. The numbness is not the end. It's the signal. The body is not betraying you. It's begging for you to return. When you start to listen, subtle sensations begin to reappear. A moment of silence feels heavier than usual. A memory triggers emotion where none existed before. That's your nervous system waking up. It's the fragile beginning of reconnection. Uncomfortable but necessary. Feeling again means healing again. The path out of emotional blackout begins with stillness, not stimulation. When you stop trying to force energy and start allowing rest, your biochemistry begins to repair. Serotonin returns as you reintroduce peace. Dopamine stabilizes as you stop chasing pressure. You start to feel small joys, the warmth of light, the rhythm of breath, the softness of stillness. That's not weakness. That's life returning. Awareness replaces numbness. Presence replaces performance. The emotional blackout was never the end of your story. It was the darkness before awakening, the mind's final cry for restoration. And when you stop fighting it, when you let yourself feel again, even pain, you reclaim the very thing burnout stole first: your humanity. The body remembers what the mind denies. Burnout doesn't live only in your thoughts. It embeds itself in your body. Every muscle that tightens, every shallow breath, every sleepless night is your nervous system carrying a story your mind refused to face. Long after you convince yourself that you're fine, your body keeps score. It stores every unresolved demand, every suppressed emotion, every moment you ignored your limits in the name of responsibility. You may forget what broke you, but your body never does. Andrew Huberman's research on the mind-body connection reveals how deeply intertwined physiology and psychology are. The vagus nerve, a long neural pathway running from brainstem to gut, governs your body's ability to regulate stress. When it's overstimulated by constant tension, your heart rate remains elevated, your breathing shortens, digestion slows, and inflammation rises. The body is not malfunctioning. It's signaling. It's communicating what your conscious mind keeps rationalizing away, that you are operating beyond your human capacity. Chronic stress becomes cellular memory. The body starts living in the past, stuck in survival even when the danger has passed.
Joe Dispenza would describe this as the body becoming the unconscious mind. Every time you suppress anger, fear, or grief, those emotions don't disappear. They translate into chemistry. Cortisol and adrenaline flood your bloodstream, altering your internal rhythm. The more often this happens, the more your body associates tension with normalcy. You start waking up tired because your nervous system never powered down. You're not weak, you're conditioned.
You've trained your body to believe that rest is unsafe, that peace is unproductive. Philosophically, this is the split Descartes warned against: the illusion that mind and body are separate. Burnout is that illusion taken to its extreme. You've treated your body as a tool for the mind's ambitions, a machine meant to obey. But a machine doesn't send you panic attacks. A machine doesn't ache with silence. What you call fatigue is actually communication, the body begging for unity, for reconciliation between thought and being. Marcus Aurelius understood this harmony centuries ago. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If your thoughts are frantic, your body follows. If your thoughts are grounded, your body heals. Daniel Goleman's work on emotional regulation shows that the body's signals are the foundation of awareness. You cannot manage emotions you refuse to feel. When burnout numbs your mind, the body becomes the last honest voice. The tightness in your chest, the restlessness in your sleep, the constant pressure in your stomach. These are not inconveniences. They're messages from the part of you that still remembers balance. The problem isn't that your body is failing. It's that your mind stopped listening. Healing begins not through control, but through reconnection. The path out of burnout starts with presence, the act of noticing without judgment. Breathe deeply enough to feel the air move through you. Stretch without goal. Sit without task. These small acts reintroduce safety to your nervous system. Huberman's physiological sigh, 2 short inhales followed by a long exhale, signals calm to the brain, lowering stress hormones almost instantly. Each breath becomes an act of reprogramming. Each moment of stillness teaches your body a new truth, that peace is no longer danger, and stillness is not failure. The body heals at the speed of awareness. The more you honor its signals, the faster it recalibrates. Burnout thrives on disconnection, the split between what the mind commands and what the body endures. When you reunite them, clarity returns. You stop treating fatigue as an obstacle and begin to see it as guidance. Your body has never been your enemy. It has always been your most honest witness, waiting for you to remember that you were never meant to live divided against yourself. The myth of the strong mind, how resilience turns against you. We glorify strength as if it were salvation. We're told to push harder, endure longer, outlast the pain. We call it resilience, a badge of honor for those who refuse to quit. But what if your strength is the very thing destroying you? What if the mind you've trained to never surrender has become the tool of your own collapse? Burnout feeds on this illusion. The belief that enduring more means you're winning. In truth, you're not enduring strength, you're enduring denial. Jordan Peterson often says that meaning is found in carrying responsibility. But responsibility without self-awareness becomes self-destruction. When resilience loses reflection, it turns into stubbornness. You stop asking if what you're carrying is even worth the weight. You mistake capacity for purpose. You confuse suffering with virtue. And so, you keep pushing, not because it's wise, but because stopping feels like weakness. You wear exhaustion as proof of dedication. You break silently because you've convinced yourself that real strength doesn't complain. Andrew Huberman's work on stress physiology makes one thing clear. The brain and body interpret chronic endurance as threat, not courage. When you push through fatigue, you activate the same neural pathways used in trauma response. Cortisol stays high, adrenaline keeps you alert, and your parasympathetic system, the one responsible for recovery, never turns on. Your body stops differentiating between discipline and danger. The mind you thought was strong is actually living in survival mode. You're not adapting, you're deteriorating. Joe Dispenza describes this as an energetic paradox. The more you resist your limits, the more your energy drains. Each act of force deepens the pattern of resistance within your neural network. You create an identity around struggle. You begin to need pressure to feel alive. Stillness feels foreign because your nervous system has equated chaos with control. This is how burnout hides behind the mask of strength. It convinces you that exhaustion is a sign of character, that collapse is just a lack of willpower. But strength that refuses vulnerability isn't strength. It's fear pretending to be courage. Philosophically, this is the corruption of Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius taught endurance, yes, but not at the expense of wisdom. The Stoics never glorified relentless effort. They glorified discernment, knowing when to act, when to stop, and when to reflect. Burnout strips you of that discernment. You keep fighting because you don't know who you are without the fight. You've mistaken your armor for your identity. And when the armor becomes too heavy, you call the pain noble instead of unnecessary. Daniel Goleman's perspective on emotional intelligence reframes this illusion. True resilience isn't about ignoring emotion. It's about regulating it. It's the ability to bend without breaking, to rest without guilt, to pause without losing purpose. When you suppress emotion in the name of toughness, you sever the very connection that allows you to recover. The strong mind that never feels becomes the fragile mind that eventually collapses. The truth is, resilience without reflection is resistance. You can't heal by fighting what you feel. You can't recover by proving you don't need rest. The courage that heals is quieter. It's the courage to listen when everything in you wants to keep pushing. It's the humility to accept that even the strongest structures crumble without maintenance. Real strength isn't about endurance. It's about alignment. It's about knowing your limits and protecting your capacity so you can keep walking with purpose rather than pride. So let this idea sink in. You don't need to break to prove you're unbreakable. The mind you've trained to carry everything doesn't need to be stronger. It needs to be wiser. Strength built on denial will always collapse. But strength built on awareness endures without suffering. That's not weakness. That's evolution. Reprogramming your neurochemistry for recovery. Recovery doesn't begin with rest. It begins with reprogramming. You can't heal burnout by doing nothing if your brain has been wired to equate stillness with danger. The body may sit still, but the mind keeps running the same neural programs that created exhaustion in the first place. To truly recover, you must teach your brain and body a new language, one that replaces pressure with presence and adrenaline with awareness. Neuroscience shows that the same mechanisms that build burnout can also rebuild resilience. Andrew Huberman's studies on neuroplasticity reveal that repetition and emotion are what sculpt the brain. Every thought, every action, every breath sends a signal that either reinforces survival or reclaims peace. If you've lived in constant urgency, your neural circuits have memorized chaos. But if you consistently practice calm, not occasionally but daily, the brain begins to rewire itself towards stability. You are not a victim of your chemistry. You are its programmer. The first step is reclaiming your baseline. Chronic burnout leaves your stress hormones permanently elevated and your dopamine system depleted. Huberman's research shows that slow, controlled breathing, especially extending the exhale, directly reduces cortisol levels and activates the parasympathetic nervous system, signaling safety to the brain. One deep breath won't heal you, but consistent breathing practices retrain your body to believe that calm is not collapse. Over time, the mind stops anticipating danger in every silence. Stillness becomes familiar again. Joe Dispenza takes this further by emphasizing the mind-body feedback loop. Your thoughts create chemical reactions, and those chemicals reinforce your thoughts. When you constantly think, "I have to do more," the body floods with stress hormones, which send signals back to the brain, confirming urgency. This feedback loop keeps you trapped in exhaustion. The way out is to interrupt the signal. When you replace those thoughts with intentional awareness, gratitude, presence, or self-compassion, you produce oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. These neurochemicals counteract cortisol and rebuild emotional balance. In simple terms, peace becomes a biological reality, not a motivational slogan. From a psychological standpoint, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, aligns perfectly with this process. It teaches that changing behavior changes emotion faster than waiting for emotion to change behavior. Small, repeatable acts of self-respect, eating well, walking outdoors, sleeping deeply, saying no without guilt, all signal safety to the brain. Each act becomes data. Each repetition rewires belief. The brain doesn't respond to inspiration, it responds to evidence. Every day you live differently, you teach your nervous system a new truth. Survival no longer requires suffering. Philosophically, this is what Descartes might have called the rebuilding of the rational self. Awareness reclaiming its throne over instinct. The Stoics would call it the return to equilibrium, the harmony between thought and nature. Marcus Aurelius spoke of aligning one's inner state with the order of the universe. Neuroscience now proves that alignment is biological. When your habits mirror peace, your brain chemistry follows. Daniel Goleman reminds us that recovery is also emotional regulation. Emotional intelligence is not suppressing chaos, but managing it with grace. When frustration arises, awareness turns reaction into reflection. That moment, the pause between impulse and action, is where neurochemical balance is restored. You're no longer ruled by adrenaline, you're guided by intention. Reprogramming your neurochemistry is not a miracle, it's a discipline. It's the art of retraining your mind to feel safe in slowness, to find reward in rest, to see peace as progress. The more you repeat calm, the more your brain believes it. The more your body experiences safety, the more it restores its natural rhythm. This is not weakness, this is mastery. The transformation begins when you stop fighting your biology and start educating it. Because burnout doesn't end by stopping everything. It ends when you start living differently, one conscious breath at a time. The return to presence, relearning how to be human. When burnout strips everything away, your energy, your joy, your clarity, what remains is a quiet question. Who am I when I'm not performing? That question is the beginning of healing. Because presence isn't just peace, it's truth. It's the space where identity and illusion separate. To return to presence is to return to being human, to remember that your value was never built on achievement, but on awareness itself. In burnout, you become a function. In presence, you become a person again. For years, you've trained your mind to live in two places at once, replaying the past and rehearsing the future. The brain, when trapped in this loop, forgets the present entirely. Andrew Huberman's research shows that mental time travel triggers the same neural pathways as physical stress. The body reacts to imagined problems as if they were happening now. That's why even on vacation, even in silence, your nervous system can't relax. You've taught it to exist everywhere but here. Presence, then, isn't a concept. It's a neurological reorientation. It's bringing your awareness home to the only place the body truly exists, this moment. Joe Dispenza's work on neuroplasticity shows that consistent presence rewires perception. When you become conscious of your thoughts and feelings instead of being consumed by them, you activate the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for regulation, creativity, and connection. You stop living reactively and start responding intelligently. The brain, once addicted to chaos, begins associating awareness with safety. The more you observe without judgment, the more you dissolve the emotional charge of your old identity. The mind calms not because the world changes, but because your perception does. Philosophically, this return to presence is what Descartes, Montaigne, and Marcus Aurelius all pursued in their own ways. Descartes sought clarity through reason. Montaigne found it in introspection. Aurelius, in disciplined stillness. They all discovered the same truth. Awareness is liberation. When you observe your mind, instead of obeying it, thought becomes tool, not master. The Stoics called this living according to nature, the alignment between consciousness and reality. Burnout happens when you live outside that alignment, when thought and action are divorced from essence. Presence restores that union. Psychologically, Daniel Goleman describes this state as emotional coherence, when body, mind, and emotion move in the same direction. In burnout, your thoughts want progress, your body wants rest, and your emotions want release. You are divided against yourself. Presence heals that division. When you breathe deeply, feel the air entering your lungs, and allow awareness to rest in the body, all systems synchronize. The mind slows, the heart steadies, the body trusts. You are no longer chasing life, you are inhabiting it. But presence isn't passive. It's not withdrawal from the world, it's engagement with reality as it is. When you return to presence, you stop needing life to be different to feel at peace. You stop outsourcing happiness to the future. You start finding it in the texture of existence, in sound, breath, light, and stillness. It's the rediscovery of simplicity, and with it, gratitude. The brain releases serotonin and oxytocin when it feels connection, not through success, but through awareness. The smallest moments become sacred again. In truth, relearning how to be human is unlearning what burnout taught you, that your worth comes from doing, that your mind must always be busy, that silence is unproductive. Presence exposes these lies with a clarity no achievement can give. When you become still, you see that peace was never missing, It was just buried under noise. You start to feel alive not because you've achieved more, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself. Presence is not escape. It's return. It's the quiet homecoming of a soul that finally remembers, you are not what you do. You are the awareness that does it. When that truth settles, burnout loses its power, because the fire that once consumed you becomes light again, steady, human, alive. The Phoenix moment, rebuilding a life that doesn't need escape. Every ending hides a beginning. Burnout feels like collapse, but what it truly represents is a moment of transformation, the death of an identity that was never sustainable. Like the Phoenix, you burn not because you failed, but because the life you built no longer matches who you've become. The fire wasn't sent to destroy you. It was sent to release you from everything false. What rises from that ash is not the same person who fell. It's someone lighter, clearer, awake. Rebuilding after burnout isn't about returning to who you were. That version of you was the one who believed peace was earned only through exhaustion. Recovery begins when you stop chasing balance as an achievement and start living it as a practice. Andrew Huberman's work reminds us that transformation is biological. The nervous system, once overstimulated, can be retrained through rhythm and repetition. When you live with conscious pacing, steady breathing, deliberate focus, consistent rest, you rewire your brain's definition of safety. Calm stops being the absence of activity and becomes the foundation of power. Joe Dispenza's research adds that identity itself is neuroplastic. Every thought you repeat builds the architecture of who you are. The old self was sculpted by stress. The new one must be shaped by awareness. If you want to rise, you can't rebuild on the same chemical foundation that burned you. Replace urgency with intention, speed with depth, striving with alignment. The future isn't something you chase anymore. It's something you allow to unfold as you act from clarity rather than fear. That's what it means to live beyond burnout, not to escape pressure, but to move through it without losing yourself. Philosophically, this is the essence of Stoic rebirth. Marcus Aurelius taught that everything must be ready to fall away, because nothing external truly belongs to us. When you release the illusion of control, you gain freedom. Descartes would call this reconstruction of the mind, the rebuilding of a clear and ordered self from the ruins of confusion. It's a philosophical cleansing, where reason meets humility and emotion finds purpose again. You don't rise by force, you rise by truth. Daniel Goleman's perspective grounds this transformation in emotional intelligence. Emotional recovery isn't just about managing stress, it's about redefining relationship, with work, with others, with yourself. The person who emerges from burnout learns to choose presence over perfection, purpose over pressure, relationships over reputation. You stop performing strength and start embodying it. You no longer chase peace, you protect it. There's a quiet beauty in realizing that burnout was never your enemy. It was your awakening. The pain you felt was not punishment, it was instruction. It was life pulling you back into alignment with what matters: your health, your consciousness, your humanity. The burnout was your system rejecting the unnatural rhythm of disconnection. What rises now is a mind and body in harmony, a soul that no longer needs to escape to feel alive. Rebirth is not about returning to fire, it's about learning to carry its light without burning. You rebuild by choosing simplicity over chaos, awareness over ambition, discipline over frenzy. Every breath becomes a declaration that you are no longer running from yourself. You have arrived, not at perfection, but at presence, not at certainty, but at peace. The phoenix does not fear the ashes. It understands that every fall is just preparation for a higher rise. So too are you. Burnout didn't end your journey. It revealed its real beginning. From this point on, your life no longer needs escape. It needs awareness, rhythm, and meaning, because freedom was never found in doing more. It was always waiting in being here, alive, whole, and awake.